Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today for another thought from the Bible. I'm coming to you today from inside my house in Liberia because it is raining fairly hard outside. We have definitely reached the rainy season here and it is showing somewhat. So here we are inside in the dry. But today I wanted to talk about a topic that I know I have talked about before over the last few years in these videos. It's something that comes up frequently through the Bible in the stories of different characters and just in different verses in the Old and the New Testament. And that is the topic of fear. See, fear, worry, anxiety, those are things that all of us experience at some point in our lives. And it looks different to different people. Some people are absolutely crippled by those things. Others just have a mild discomfort from their anxiety. And different things scare us. There are different things that set off that horrible feeling in your stomach that this is uncomfortable and we don't like this situation. But the commonality with however strongly we feel those things, whatever it is that may set those feelings off, is that worry, anxiety, fear, they steal our peace, they steal our joy, they can put a block in our faith. When we allow worry in, when we allow those anxious thoughts into our minds, it can stop us recognizing God's ability to come through for us. Now, Saul was a young man in the Bible who was anointed to be the first king of the nation of Israel. And for years now, he's been ruling this people group, finding himself in this constant battle against the Philistine people. And at one point, the Bible tells us that Saul was facing this army which had 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. The Israelites were justifiably, I think, a little bit scared about facing this army. In fact, 1 Samuel chapter 13 tells us that when the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Now, Saul is leading his army, the Israelite army, and he is seeing that all the troops with him were quaking with fear. But it's okay. It's fine. It's all going to be okay, because Saul knew that Samuel, the man of God, would be coming within a week. He was going to come to bless their endeavors, to help them to win this battle. It was all going to be okay. But you know what? Days went by and men from Saul's army started to slink away and join those other people in hiding. And Saul, he watches and he waits, and 7 days of fear pass by. Our imaginations are very powerful things. And I really feel for Saul, because every day he was probably hearing reports of this vast army. Maybe he had scouts coming in talking about their numbers and their positions. And every day, more and more, he was seeing that there was no natural way at all for him to win this war. The odds were completely and utterly against him. He was watching as his men literally deserted the cause. And his brain must have been painting this picture of a great defeat, perhaps the end of the nation of Israel altogether. That nation that was promised by the patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, that God told would be this nation that would bless all others, that would be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. It could be run over by this Philistine horde, never to rise again. And it was all resting on his shoulders. And so Saul, he decides to offer up this burnt offering himself. And it's a big mistake. In a time where kings of the land were often personally responsible for bringing sacrifices to their gods, or where they indeed often set themselves up as deities in their own rights, God had made a distinction in Israel between the kingship and the priesthood. They were to be two separate roles, two separate responsibilities. The people from separate tribes even. Judah would be the kingly tribe, and Levi, the tribe that the priests would come from. The king was not supposed to make this offering. In doing so, he had gone against a direct command from God. His intentions were not bad. He wasn't turning away from God. In fact, he really wanted God's blessing and intervention in the battle. But Saul's fear drove him to go against that direct command. See, fear will always whisper to us that there's not enough time, that there's no way to win this battle, that we're behind where we should be in our lives, that God's not going to come through for us this time. This time, we're on our own. And when we listen to those whispers, it can make us rash. It can push us to make mistakes, to jump into situations that we know aren't really right, but that might be able to get us out of a sticky spot if we just go for it. Maybe if I just told that little lie, it would get me out of this fearful situation. Maybe if I just joined in with the gossipers at work, it would make people like me. Maybe if I took on this role that I know will push me into some difficult grey areas in my work, that will earn me more money and I'll be able to provide more for my family. You see the idea just over and over again. Fear can push us into situations that force us to disobey a command from God. Now, waiting is not easy, but it's often the way that God works. In my personal experience, it's often God's pattern to wait until the very last minute to come through, to teach us about complete reliance on him. It always seems to be at the 11th hour when the finance comes in, or the miracle happens, or the door opens. I think, I always feel that I would much rather personally see that provision or answer or guidance right away, right? I'd rather see it sooner than later. But honestly, if we got the answers to our prayers just like that every single time, I don't know that we would ever really learn to trust in God, even when it seems like everything is going wrong. We wouldn't have those experiences of seeing God come through for us, because God does always come through for us in the end, and his timing is absolutely perfect, even if to us it looks a little bit hard to understand and a little bit crazy even. When fear rears its ugly head, stop listening to it and start praising God instead. Start reading this book. Start reading about God's promises in his word. Start listening to those promises. Start thinking what that means for your life. As the Bible tells us, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand, to wait, not to take action, to stand. Trust in God's perfect timing. We don't see the whole picture, right? We just see this tiny part of our lives that we're living in right now. But God sees it all. He knows what we need. When fear tells us to take a rash action, faith tells us to wait, because God will come through for us. He will come through for you. Now, I know this is easy to say, right? Oh yeah, just, when you're feeling anxious, just stop feeling that way. Just put it down. It's easier said than done, isn't it? But it is something that is possible. And honestly, it is something that gets easier with practice. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6 tells us, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition and with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. In every single situation, come to God in prayer, come to God with thanksgiving, present your requests to him. Do we really genuinely, honestly do that in every single situation? Perhaps if we did, anxiety would be less able to get a foothold in our heads and in our hearts. And maybe today you're in a position where you're saying, well, it's a bit too late for me. I have given in to fear. I do feel overwhelmed by this. I have made mistakes trying to solve things myself, trying to just make a situation work in some way that I knew wasn't right. Well, I have such good news for you today, because God's mercy is so great. Saul, even with that big mistake that he made, God still came through for him. He still came through for the Israelite people. Despite the impossible odds, Israel routed that Philistine army and saw a great victory. The Lord saved Israel, the Bible says, and he will save you too. Don't listen to the fear. Listen to the Lord. Thank you so much for joining me today for that thought from the Bible. Sorry, it's a little bit longer than normal, but this is such a topic that I'm so passionate about, because fear really can rob us of all of the best that God has for us. So I really hope that encouraged you today. Thank you for joining me, and I will be back on Wednesday next week with another thought from the Bible. So I will see you then.